we are going to talk about culturally responsive instruction. So, looking at what is culturally responsive instruction, what do you think culturally responsive instruction is? That's it. No, it's no deep down. We've got to have 15 people and 100 authorities to say this is what culturally responsive instruction is. What I hope to do is have an interactive session today. Always after lunch, you need to get up and move around a little bit and chat with each other and talk. And so that's what I hope to have for you today as we talk about culturally responsive instruction. We want you to have these positive attitudes toward culturally responsive instruction. And when you are trying to do that in the school, you need to learn some different kinds of ways and different kinds of approaches so that you can become more culturally responsive. So what we do is take the curriculum, look at the curriculum, and what I believe in doing is infusing the curriculum, not changing it, but infusing the curriculum so that it is responsive. I don't like this add-on approach that where we just put it on at the end. I noticed that when I'm working with my students and they're doing their lesson plans, and there's all the little boxes that you put, your objective and your goals and your teacher input and so on and so forth. And you get down to the bottom, and then there's culturally responsive instruction. Well, you got 10 lesson plans, and you just duplicate that. Same thing in all 10 boxes. Not really infusing it throughout the class, but just adding it on the end. So I want to introduce an infused approach rather than just clipped on the end, an add-on approach. And you want the curriculum still to be cohesive and comprehensive. You don't want the curriculum we're not teaching a history lesson. If we're teaching math, then we need to teach culturally responsive math. It's not a history lesson. And still infuse it at the same time. And you want it throughout the curriculum. And that doesn't mean every other word you're saying, culturally responsive, culturally responsive, culturally responsive. You want it to fit and infuse throughout in a natural places that it should fit and infuse throughout. You also want to respond to the needs of the families of diverse learners because you're always trying to link your instruction to the home. And that is how we do that. When we respond in that way, we are linking it to the home. And we want to use best practices. Now, I like to always start with what they call evidence-based practices and then infuse the evidence-based practice. That's where I always like to start. So those are some challenges and issues. Now, I am going to talk about Moray and Catano's infusion, the way they infuse diversity. And they infuse diversity on 3 levels, and this is their model. First, we have the principles of learning, what you're actually going to be teaching the students. And then we have the principles of multicultural or urban strategies or diversity. We have those. And then you have your diversity goals, just as well as you have the classroom goals. So you've got the nature of the lesson, and you don't want to change the nature of the lesson. You want to infuse, but you don't want to change that. And I want you all to know that all of these are in your Dropbox, so I just want to make sure that you can, if you have access to them. Now, there are 3 levels of change here: exclusive, inclusive, and transformed. This is your lowest level. This is your highest level, and I'm going to give you a definition for each one of those. We also have elements of lessons, always. The content, what you're going to teach. Are you going to adapt some of the content? Are you going to adapt your instruction, your assessment, and then the overall dynamics of the classroom? That's the interaction among the peers, the interaction that you have with the students. A lot of times, what are you presenting? What's on your walls? Especially if you're elementary, what do you have showing in your classroom? So you look at those kinds of things, of the climate of the classroom, when you start talking about dynamics. And in your lesson, you always have description, purpose, goals, objectives, reading, assignments, particular school policies. There are some things you have to touch no matter what. And so you have to look at all of those within your lesson. Common Core, for instance, has to be on the lesson. If the state is saying we're going to do Common Core, it's so controversial now, then those are the things that you have to have. So this is Moray and Catano's model. Okay, so we'll talk about the exclusive level first. Now, the exclusive level is a level. It's a level. It's the minor, the smallest, the lowest level, but it's still a level. Diversity is restricted to one part of the lesson. That's at the bottom, down there in that little box. You have a line written about diversity. Now, you see these? This is Igloo. So, food, folklore, fun, and fashion. That's the lowest level. You mention it. You mention diversity. You mention it according to stereotypes. You mention it always in the mainstream of whatever the general worldview of public may be seeing about that particular group of people. But it is a level. And if people have not explored that level, they need to explore that level, even though it's a small, tiny bit. Now, when we talk about these levels, we always have to look at academics. Yes, we can take a color and color a face. We can dress up, serve some food, but it also has to do with academics. What kind of reading materials? Do the reading materials that you use confirm the same myths that's always out there? What about your instructional strategies? Is it just lecture? Do you get students up and have them moving around? Are you aware of the way that they learn, the different ways that they learn? Is your instruction teacher-centered or student-centered? What kind of exams do you have? All of those kinds of things have to do with the level that you're teaching on, and that is more than just coloring a brown face. So you're looking at social dynamics, or you're not looking at them. At this level, you don't. You stay with the basics: food, folklore, fun, and fashion. You don't get into any kind of social dynamics. Now we have the next level, which is the inclusive level. And you then will have diversity talked about throughout the lesson. You have some different reading materials, varying viewpoints. You mention some social views, but you don't really get into a deep discussion about them. You don't have any self-reflection. You'll just present it. Now, this is a pretty comfortable place to be at the inclusive level because it's not controversial. Sometimes people feel that all diversity that you talk about, all urban strategies, all multiculturalism is controversial. But for this level, it's not. Now, you will have, as far as your academics, array of assessment methods. You'll have some speakers to talk. It's still teacher-centered, basically teacher-centered. You have students to use critical thinking, and you have more student involvement with this level. But because you're not elaborating on those social views, it's a very comfortable level to use also of infusion. Now we have this transformed level. Now this level, you are challenging traditional views in different ways that you think. Now you're getting into what they call critical pedagogy. That is, we're going student-centered. You self-evaluate, students self-evaluate. Different all the way around. You're using projects and assignments. It's real life. So it's very close to what students do in the transform lesson. It's a paradigm shift. And you use reflection techniques. You have vignettes. And sometimes students have to sit when they're doing these vignettes and doing these role plays. Have you had students to sit in a chair and they have to sit? I might be getting too old for this year. They have to sit like this. The other ones have to sit that way so you can form a barrier, because the conversations get heated. You talk about heated subjects. And I would have to say you have to be pretty smooth to do this, okay? When I'm teaching my classes and I use transformed, I may have one or two in there, because transform brings up values and how people think about things differently. You really get into social dynamics. And when we get into those kinds of things, you know, feelings come up with that, right? Okay. So I think you also get into critical problem solving. But, you know, when I looked at this, I saw how well this fits into Common Core. And I'll talk about that later on, because they do a lot of this real life and examination and argument and values in Common Core as a way to teach. So I'm going to talk about Bloom's taxonomy just a little bit, because when you're talking about critical thinking and knowledge and comprehension, and you're adding that to the various levels of urban strategies or multicultural education, you need to address Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy is also mentioned, and if you've looked at any Common Core books, you see Bloom's taxonomy mentioned in those books. And there are 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And I have the old and the new here of Bloom's taxonomy. So you work from your memory to your organizing and comparing, using new knowledge, all the way to defending opinions. And you can see why this fits well with Common Core. And then I have some examples here, all the way from what are the health benefits of eating apples to, do you feel that serving apple pie for an after-school snack for children is healthy? Why not? Can you use apples for something other than food? And so on and so forth. So you go from just coughing the information up to creating and evaluating. So if you're looking at exclusive, inclusive, and transform, this is how Bloom's taxonomy fits with that model. At the exclusive, diverse groups are discussed in relation to stereotypes. And then we have the food, folklore, fauna, and fashion. Inclusive, diversity is discussed throughout the lesson. Reading and social views, and you assess those, and then you got your transform with the critical pedagogy when you're looking at the levels of change. And you put these together, and you see exclusive goes with knowledge and remembering, inclusive with comprehension, understanding, and application, because you are applying, it is throughout the lesson. And then transform will have to do with your analysis, because you're using self-reflection, critical pedagogy, synthesizing, putting information together, evaluating, creating. So, looking at the content and the process, and you will get the product of curriculum change infused with urban strategies. Now, I have an example lesson here using folklore to teach reading. The entire lesson is in the Dropbox, but I just pulled a little bit out for you to look at to see what you would think is exclusive, inclusive, and transform. Now, you know how we have that. It's what's right, what's wrong? Tell us. You look at it. You determine what is exclusive, inclusive, or transform, because there's always a reason why you think that way. You all are bright people. You probably did well in school. That's why you're teachers and you felt like you could get your degree and teach other people. So let's look at that. Let's do a little examination. When looking at a lesson, I had a student turn in Johnny Appleseed, and she said with the writing project, because this is a writing lesson, and she said, well, instead of talking about Johnny Appleseed, I'll talk about John Henry. Add a little diversity. We'll talk about this folklore lesson to teach reading or writing, and looking at the different levels of infusion. So, looking at the different levels of infusion, which one do you think is exclusive, inclusive, or transform? When you have a lesson and you begin to add these elements to them, then you think about what level you're on. Because a lot of times we think in stereotypes. I think in stereotypes many times. And as we have more experiences, we learn to think a little bit differently about things. As far as my area being cultural diversity, I still learn, I still experience, I still see things that challenge my thinking. You know, you get to know things a little bit better, and it challenges your stereotypes. I know we all like to think, we don't have those. I don't have any stereotypes. I'm enlightened. This is 2014. It's not popular. It's not politically correct. It's not. We have them. We're human beings. We have those things. And it's good to recognize it, that you had that and you changed your view. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I learn. I learn. Now, you look at the individual, gender, age, sexual orientation, the home environment, race, religion, ethnicity, class, geography, education, occupation, family status, and the classroom environment. All of those things come together. And we have to find some commonality in here if we're going to teach children. We're going to teach persons. Because I don't teach children anymore, I teach adults. But I still have to find this. I have to find those commonalities. Looking at facts, ideas, concepts. I have to examine my values, my attitudes, my beliefs when I'm working with the students. And you'll have to do that too. And I have all of these transactions that I have with the population that I work with. So we're going to translate. We're going to do a little work here now. And I guess you said I was reading that little writing. That was a lot of work. But we're going to have a little bit more work here. And I'm going to talk about Girl that Jamaica Kincaid wrote and the things they carried, Tim O'Brien. And I have another experience I want you all to look at. I'm going to read through the piece and look at the settings, time, place, and culture. Because all of that makes a difference. The setting, time, place, and culture. And we call this a translation. Now, what a translation does is help you to look at other cultures and how they think about things. Because we think about things differently. And I want you to do a translation. Well, some of you all will do a translation. And you can also use this with your students. Now, here's a translation of an unmarried white middle-class female. But first, what I want to read to you is Girl. A little bit, just an excerpt from Girl. Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. Wash the white clothes on Monday and put them on the stone heap. Wash the color clothes on Tuesday and put them on the clothesline to dry. Don't walk barehead in the hot sun. Cook pumpkin fritters in very hot, sweet oil. Soak your little clothes right after you take them off. When buying cotton to make yourself a nice blouse, be sure that it doesn't have gum on it, because that way it won't hold up well after a wash. Soak saltfish overnight before you cook it. Is it true that you sing Benna in Sunday school? Always eat your food in such a way that it won't turn someone else's stomach. On Sundays, try to walk like a lady and not like the slut you are, so bent on becoming. Okay, so I stop right here. It goes on and on and on. So, who you think is talking to who here? Mother's talking to her daughter, telling her what's important, what do you need to do, what you don't need to do. And if you look at mother-daughter connections, what would you think a Hispanic mother is telling to her child? An African-American mother is telling her child. International. Venezuela. They moved here. I mean, we have these translations. Father and son. Father and daughter. So I have a different translation here. 2014 sample translation, unmarried, white, middle-class female. Get your t-shirts out of the dryer right away so they won't wrinkle. Stay away from McDonald's and all those other fast food places. They'll make you fat. Keep lean cuisines in your freezer so you will have something safe to eat at home. Eat before you go out on a date. You don't want boys to think you're some kind of pig. And don't let people take your picture when you're drunk. Once they get it posted on Facebook or YouTube, no, you won't. So this may be written different according to the person, according to the culture, according to the time. Because when do you think this was written? Do you think this is recently? No, it's in the past. He's talking about on the stone heap, washing on the stone heap. A little bit different. When you do these translations, it gives you insight about who people are and how they see the world. Now, the things they carried by Tim O'Brien, this is some excerpts from that. First Lieutenant Jimmy Cross carried letters from a girl named Martha, a junior at Mount Sebastian College in New Jersey. They were not love letters, but Lieutenant Cross was hoping, so he kept them folded in plastic at the bottom of his rucksack. In the late afternoon, after a day's march, he would dig his foxhole, wash his hands under a canteen, unwrap the letters, hold them with the tips of his fingers, and spend the last hour of fight pretending. He would imagine romantic camping trips into the White Mountains in New Hampshire. He would sometimes taste the envelope flaps, knowing her tongue had been there. Got a grunt out of somebody, huh? Okay. Well, the things they carry in high school backpacks. Here is a sample translation. The things they carried were largely determined by necessity. Among the necessities and near necessities of 10th grade girls were a 3-ring binder with color-coded dividers for African American literature, for American literature. Just put that African American thing in there. American history, and the third year of French or Spanish, biology, algebra 3, which some call pre-calc. More important to them were iPhones, Blackberries, and flavored lip gloss, stuffed into the small outside pockets for easy access, and what they considered spare moments for especially easy return when a teacher approach in what they did not think were moments to spare. So we're looking at the difference in what they carry in their backpacks. Now, so this might be very different for a male and what he might be carrying. So that very much depends on if you're talking about mother-daughter, what people are you translating for, and how are you translating that? Yes, very controversial, isn't it? Code switching. I code switch. And sometimes when I'm lecturing, I code switch. If I want a little bit more emphasis, I code switch. Because I'm not going there, it's very different to me than I ain't going. You definitely know I'm not going if I say I ain't going. Just a little bit of difference there. And it's knowing when to use appropriate language at a particular time. There are times when we need to change that language a little bit to some very personal language, and it's according to the context that you're using. I'm going to read this excerpt, and I have the whole article from How to Tame a Wild Tongue. We're going to have to control your tongue, the dentist says, pulling out the metal from my mouth. Silver bits plop and tinkle into the basin. My mouth is a mother lode. The dentist is cleaning out my roots. Ugh. I get a whiff of the stench when I gasp. Ugh, I can't cap that tooth yet. You're still draining. We're going to have to do something with your tongue. I hear the anger rising in his voice. My tongue keeps pushing out the wads of cotton, pushing back the drills and the long needle. I've never seen anything as strong or stubborn. He says, and I think, how do you tame a wild tongue? Train it to be quiet. How do you bridle and settle it? How do you make it lie down? Who is to say that robbing a people of its language is less violent than war? I remember being caught speaking Spanish at recess. That was good for 3 licks on the knuckles with a sharp ruler. I remember being sent to the Anglo teacher when all I was trying to do was tell her how to pronounce my name. This kind of goes on a little bit like what Stephen had yesterday. So when you're talking about code switching, you have to look at the audience, who you're talking to. If you're sending an email to a professor, it's going to be very different from a friend. Looking at your change in audience. If you're trying to get a loan, if you're trying to get a loan from a friend or a loan from a bank, different conversation. You change clothing for a different ecosystem also, according to how you would dress. I'm sure you dress very differently today than you would be on Saturday, and for some people on Sunday. Why do you switch? What is the consequences if you don't switch? And should you need to switch?